Story 1. Last time I posted, it was about some lady stealing my headphones, and I said I might tell a story from my dad. This one is crazier than the last story, so you're gonna need to take my word for it. I want to be a police officer when I grow up, and my dad is a police officer. This is how I figured it out. My dad comes home and hugs me and my older brother. He asks if we want to hear a story. This is when I was about 11, 12. He gets ready to tell us the story, changing his clothes, checking his email. Then we head into the basement, and he starts the story. Chapter 1. What happened before he was there? My dad is on patrol with his partner, we'll call him Bucky for Bucky Barons, and as always, dispatch blurts out something from his radio. We have a male causing a disturbance at a Walmart on address. Caller says he is getting violent, throwing things, and getting close to employees. Proceed with caution. My dad tells Bucky to head to the Walmart and informs dispatch they are en route. Chapter 2. What were the first parts of the encounter? My dad pulls up at the Walmart. Hey, it was the same Walmart from the last story, and enters with Bucky, tasers drawn. As soon as they enter, they see a 6-foot man kicking carts as a teenager is yelling at the employees, with one little toddler sitting in the man's cart, confused as heck. Bucky rushes up to the man, and this is the dialogue. Stop yelling, stop yelling. Tell me what's going on. Bucky yells as my dad rushes to the employee who is getting berated by the teenager. The man turns to Bucky. This idiot, pointing to a female employee who's ready to start crying, didn't want to service me for no reason. The man yells as he walks up to a hand sanitizer stand and kicks it down. Sir, calm down. We'll figure this out if you want to work with us, Bucky tells the man. My dad finally stops the teenager from yelling. The man then rushes up to Bucky and gives him a mean right hook, knocking Bucky to the floor. Then my dad gives the man a kick to the pelvis area and tases him. The teenager rushes up to my dad, and this is where it really escalates. Chapter 3. Things get intense. The teenager kicks my dad's back as Bucky calls for backup. My dad doesn't recall the exact details, but he does remember the man getting up and getting tased, but the taser fails. He also remembers that the teenager kept running from Bucky and got tased. 2 security guards also came and tried to help. Backup arrives, and they all take down the teenager and the man. The teenager spits in the other officer's face. This is before they had spit hoods and such, so one of the officers actually put tape over the teenager's mouth. Chapter 4. What happened before we were there? Well, this is a silly reason why the man made a fuss. He had been shoplifting, and they called the police and didn't service him. Security was dealing with something else, so as soon as they could, they rushed over. The employee who was getting screamed at was a new employee, so she was very confused and saddened. Chapter 5. The aftermath. The man was arrested for battery on an officer, assault on a police officer, disturbing the peace, and they added some child neglect charges for having the teenager fight with him. The man didn't get a court case. He ended up in plea bargains and was unsurprisingly convicted. The teenager was given only a battery on an officer charge and a disturbing the peace charge. This also made it to the plea bargains. The toddler was given to the mother, who was a nice lady with a kinder grandma. That was the story. If you ever heard a story like this, but from a civilian or employee's perspective, now you know what kind of wild stuff goes on from the police officer's side. Story 2. I want to preface this by saying this is not my story. It is my friend's, and she wanted me to share this. She's written this, hence it is in the first-person point of view. I was traveling by myself for the first time, and I'm only 18. I booked the aisle seat specifically because I didn't want to be in the middle of 2 strangers, as that would make me very uncomfortable and self-conscious. I paid extra for the seat specifically for this reason. When I got to my seat, there was a middle-aged man, around 30-40 years old, in my seat. Normally, I'm very socially anxious, and this time even more so as it was my first time alone. But there was no way I was going to sit between 2 random strangers. So I did what anybody would do and informed him that this was my seat and showed him my boarding pass. He admitted it wasn't his seat, but that his coworker was in the seat next to him in the next row and he wanted to be with him. Instead, he offered me his seat, which he said was the window seat. The window seat is my favorite but costs more. So in my head, I was getting a good deal, so I happily took it. I basically hopped, jumped, and skipped to take the seat and settled down happily. That was until another man came and told me that I was in his seat. I looked at the first man, expecting him to pull out his ticket showing I was in his seat. But instead, he literally looks at me sheepishly and says that his seat is actually the middle seat and hoped I didn't mind sitting in the middle. Not only did he lie to me about his seat, hoping that the seat was empty, but he also expected me to be okay with sitting in the middle. At this point, I'm slightly angry. I might be socially anxious, but I'm not a pushover. I told him no. I only agreed because he said his seat was the window seat and that he needed to move to his seat, or I would call the crew to sort this out. At this point, he just kept parroting the words, "My coworker is here. I want to sit next to him. Maybe you can be a sweet little girl and sit in the middle just this one time." The moment he said that, I realized I only had to deal with this because I was young and a woman. So now I'm livid and immediately call for the crew after repeatedly saying no, because again, I paid extra for the seat. Even when the crew came to sort it out, he wasn't listening. He kept telling them that there wasn't any issue and that this was just a small disagreement that could be sorted between us. When I informed them what was happening, they requested him to move. He just kept saying, "Maybe you can be nice. Can you please do me this favor?" And then immediately switched to, "You know you should respect your elders. Why do you need the aisle seat? You can easily fit in the middle." Turns out the other person wasn't even his coworker. He was a random person who had his earphones in, completely unaware of the situation until it escalated. At this point, I could not believe the entitlement. I told him I paid extra for the seat, and if he wanted the seat, maybe he should have paid the extra fees. Since he didn't and I did, I was going to sit in the seat I paid for, and he could deal with it. Thankfully, the crew basically forced him out of my seat and into his with the threat of him being removed from the aircraft. The entire time, he kept looking at me sourly and muttering under his breath about how the youth of today are so disrespectful, and they should give priority to older passengers and the men, which I, of course, ignored. It was even funnier when he wanted the non-vegetarian meal and had to get the vegetarian one because I got the last one. He threw a fit about this as well, but I pre-ordered my meal while he didn't, so I was offered it first. At this point, the crew was getting sick of him, so they told him they could give him an aisle seat in a row that was behind us. He obviously jumped at this opportunity. The crew switched him out for this nice lady. It turns out he got the very last row near the lavatory, which is why the lady was happy to switch in the first place. Story 3. There is a lady named Irene who does not seem to understand the concept that my email address is not hers. She gives it out constantly, and repeated efforts to explain to her that she has it wrong have gone unheeded. Strong boomer energy from this one. As a result, I know she lives down in the United States. She banks at Chase. She drives a Toyota RAV4 that is due for an oil change, and she seems to be having some medical issues down there. Irene, if you see this, call your doctor. She sounds concerned. I have repeatedly asked the various people involved to please inform Irene that she is providing all these places with my email address, which is, again, not hers. The only piece of information she has never provided is her phone number, so I have not been able to call her. Although, I did send her a Christmas card last year that read, "Irene, Merry Christmas. Stop telling people your email address is my email. It isn't, it's mine." Recently, it appears that Irene has been trying to buy a new house and is planning a trip to Venice. I know this because I got all the confirmations of her travel plans from her travel agent, as well as all the confirmations from her mortgage broker and insurance agent. This resulted, a couple of weeks ago, in somewhere in the neighborhood of 70 emails a day, informing me of every detail of each of these transactions. So, I followed my usual approach. I emailed the agents back and probably slightly less politely than I could have been informed the agents that Irene is once again giving out my email address as her own, and I have no interest in any of the private documents they had sent her. Apparently, they tried to call her. Unfortunately, I suspect they all tried to call her within a few minutes of each other to tell her the same thing, and she got very angry with all of them. She told them very rudely that, in fact, my email address is hers, and people needed to stop telling her that it wasn't. And why hadn't any of them sent her any emails yet confirming all of this stuff she was trying to do? Not long after, I separately got apologetic emails from each of them, the insurance agent, the travel agent, and the mortgage broker, telling me that they were very sorry, but Irene was very insistent that this was her email address, so they couldn't remove it from her account. This seems very silly to me, but I am not American and do not understand American rules. So I told them that since I was apparently Irene, and I am completely sure that I did not apply for a mortgage or for insurance, that all of those should be canceled immediately. The mortgage broker told me that if we did that, we might not meet the date required in the contract for the removal of subjects. I told him that since Irene, was not applying for a mortgage, that didn't matter. The travel agent, who it seems had received the majority of the earful from Irene, seemed completely indifferent to my request to cancel my trip to Venice. She did tell me that there might be a cancellation fee for the original flight to Frankfurt. Why she was flying to Frankfurt to get to Venice, I have no idea. I assume there are no direct flights to Italy, so I told her to cancel all the rest of the flights and hotel rooms except the original flight to Frankfurt. Don't want to cost Irene that extra $20, after all. I have not heard anything further, and I am a little sad about that, as there's a part of me that loves the idea of Irene flying to Frankfurt, getting there, and realizing all her connecting and return flights are canceled. And I do wonder if she ever bought that house. But at least the emails have stopped. Story 4. I've been taking my kid to this park in downtown my town for years. We always go in the late afternoon, which means two things. Everything is still hot, and only some parking spots will have shade. I should also mention my air conditioning is broken, and I often bring our dog. So obviously, I'm going to park in a shaded spot if at all possible, and this is a busy park around this time, so I may end up passing over several sunny spots in favor of one in the shade. Funny thing is, all the shaded spots are often full because other folks like parking in the shade too. Thankfully, no matter how busy it is, there's usually one on curb spot that's still closed and partially shaded, so I often park there. It is a fully marked spot on the public roadway, but it is in front of a house that faces the park. Well, a couple of weeks ago, I started finding notes on my window claiming the spot is private for that house, and people can't park there. I knew the spot was public, but emailed the city anyways to verify, and they confirmed it was public right-of-way and public parking, not reserved for the residents, etc., etc. Fully covered all my bases. So I kept going to the park as usual, getting a new note every time I parked in that spot. Finally, I got one that read, "Last chance." He had also reparked his car as close to mine as possible in front to make it harder to leave, I guess. But in the process, also blocked the sidewalk. So I took a picture of the letter and of his car parked on the sidewalk, then left. When I got home, I compiled two emails, one to the city's public works and the other to the city police department. In the first, I detailed how the resident was blocking the sidewalk and not letting people park in the public spots. In the second email, I explained how the resident was harassing people and touching cars. Finally, I looked up the property in the city's GIS map. I had a hunch based on the out-of-state plates that they were renters, and sure enough, I was able to find the actual owners of the property and fired off some messages on social media to them as well. Today, I received a follow-up email from city workers that they're issuing a $30 ticket to the resident for blocking the sidewalk. The police are going to deliver it to also educate said resident on public parking. Welcome to the neighborhood, jerk.